Wallace. So as I was reviewing the next section that's coming up immediately in the text, I was struck by the very empirical way or approach that Panchen Rinpoche is taking here. It's not always the case. I'm somewhat familiar with the kind of Gelugpa literature on Madhyamaka and so on. And I've often had the impression, at least, whether or not it's true is another question, that it was very, very cerebral, very intellectual, very conceptual, very analytical, very logical, very philosophical. And there's nothing wrong with any of that, as there are multiple routes to realizing the same reality, such as Rigpa. Clearly, there are multiple routes for realizing emptiness. There's not just one path. And so there are intellectuals who are just extremely gifted in philosophical analysis and working with concepts, with that whole approach. And Tsongkhapa just lays out the red carpet for them and said, if this is your approach, here it is. And he is truly a consummate master of that. But the approach here taken by Panchen Rinpoche, who is of course an utterly accomplished scholar in the Gelugpa tradition, in this very concise meditation manual where he's about to say, and here are the pith instructions. You should always keep your eyes open for that. It's translated in different ways, of course, but that's my translation. It's a fairly common translation. Then it's kind of like, now we're going right to the core of it. There may be background, there may be theoretical context and all of that, but now we're just going right to the nucleus. When you see pith instruction, or however the translator translates it, then you know, okay, this is it. If you don't like the pith instruction, if it's not your cup of tea, you probably want to find another vehicle, right? If you don't really care for the Four Noble Truths, they're just not your cup of tea, you probably want to find something outside of Buddhism. It's probably not what you want, right? Because that's the Buddha's pith instruction, the Four Noble Truths, right? So what am I getting at here? The next part is really worth memorizing because it's really simple. And that is, he's going to invite us from a state of equipoise. I'll read it later, but I'm paraphrasing it closely right now. From a state of equipoise, examine the manifest nature of yourself, and in three modalities. How do you exist? How do you appear? And how do you apprehend yourself? Those three are worth memorizing. There's really enormous power in these. How do you exist? How do you appear? And how do you apprehend yourself? Those three. And he's not talking about engaging in a thought experiment. He's not talking about philosophy. I mean, again, I don't mean to deprecate philosophy at all. It's a noble tradition. There are many brilliant minds in the history of philosophy in the West and in the East. So I'm not deprecating that at all. But William James was a philosopher, but the type of philosophy that he advocated, which I am enormously enamored by, is radical empiricism. And the phenomenologists, Husserl, Heidegger, and so forth, they're also very brilliant philosophers, great analytical skills. But they, like William James, but William James in language I can understand, contrary to Heidegger and Husserl, who's much more difficult to understand, are going right to the experience, right? And not substituting for experience concepts, ideas, conceptual constructs, which happens a lot, a great deal. So he says, from a state of equipoise. Well, there's the first point. This is really now direct commentary on the text, which we haven't even read yet, but I want to see that we just, completely fuse our engagement with the text, with the practice. Okay? That's the idea. That's why I'm giving this, front-loading this section, From a state of equipoise. Well, of course, he just finished talking about shamatha and completing that job. And so optimally, he really does mean after you've achieved shamatha. And you're resting there, having identified what he calls the relative nature of your mind. You're just right there nakedly, resting in your own mind, stripped down to its nucleus, its primal flow of cognizance and luminosity. So you really know your mind conventionally, the flow of consciousness. You really know it. Just like eating chocolate, and while you're eating chocolate, you know chocolate. And it's not an abstraction, it's not a concept, it's just chocolate, chocolate, chocolate. I know it directly. Well, that's how you know your consciousness. But it's not just knowing it, but you're also resting there in this superbly fine-tuned equilibrium. It's called nyam-sha, an equal placing of your awareness. I mean, it's really, we speak of the ideal of objectivity in science. This is the ideal of objectivity in contemplative inquiry. That you're balanced, It's neither lax nor excited. It's just there, evenly, ready to launch. So it is an argument for, it's not an argument like having an argument, but it's an argument for really taking this sequentially, Not just tasting here and tasting there and tasting there. We're finished. Okay, let's find the next text. And then taste here and taste there and taste there. Let's find the next text and do that. When I was reflecting upon this, or just thoughts were coming up, I thought of a story I've told many times, so I'll give the extremely concise version now, of Losang Tenzin, the monk who had everything taken away from him in Tibet by the Chinese communists, was imprisoned, escaped from prison, and then escaped from the country, and leaving everything behind, his family, possessions, his land, everything behind. And then joined the Indian military, was in, I think, for two furloughs, and then got out with no attachment, I think, for anything in the world, because he left everything that he loved behind, and he was not old, he was 48, I think he was 48 at this time, and there was just one thing. There was only one thing worth living for, and that was Dharma. And this man who was, he certainly was not very educated, but he had to be educated enough that he could read. He really had some guts, because he went to the senior tutor of the Dalai Lama, Yongzhen Lingren Rinpoche, and asked him for personal guidance, said, I want to achieve enlightenment, would you guide me? The senior tutor, that takes guts to do that. He wasn't a tukur or a Rinpoche. He was a farmer turned soldier to an ex-soldier who had nothing on his mind besides Dharma. But Yongzhen Lingren Rinpoche, the senior tutor, saw, here's a guy that's, if I teach him, he's going to follow it. And so Lingren Rinpoche then just taught him Lamrim step by step. Because I heard this from his own lips. I translated for him a couple of times. Losang Tenzin. He taught him precious human breathing, for Lamrim from the beginning, but he would spoon feed him. It's the best type of guidance. It's called Nyongti in Tibetan, experiential guidance, where the person teaching has realization, and the person teaching gives you a teaspoon, and said, here, try this. Here's the meditation on the rarity and the great, enormous value of a precious human rebirth. Meditate on this until you really get it. And then he went off to his cave, meditated until he got it, and he said, okay, I'm hungry. And then he would give him the teaching then impermanence. And right through, step by step, he had nothing else to do, And so step by step, he led him right through the Lamrim, and then into Vajrayana. And he would just come down, receive the teaching, go practice. And so Lingren Rinpoche, drawing from his own enormous erudition, but also as a highly accomplished yogi, then he just led him step by step. It's called Nyongti, experiential guidance, where you have the experience, you give guidance step by step to the other one until they have gained the experience, and then you lead them like that. It's very sequential. There's nothing rigid about it. It's like, learning mathematics in stages. You learn arithmetic, and then you learn this and this and this, but you don't do a little bit of algebra and then, differential calculus, and then go back and do subtraction and then trigonometry. It actually is very linear, and you do really kind of master one. You master algebra before you go on to geometry, master geometry before trigonometry before calculus, and, there you go. And that's the nature of path. So in 8 weeks, we really can't do that. Otherwise, we'd just be staying at, very, very elementary. And then, some of you will probably never see again. So it's not very practical in a setting like this. But that is optimal, really. That's optimal. So he says, from a state of meditative equipoise. Well, the real essence of this, in this context, is what I've been emphasizing all the way through, that stillness in the midst of motion. That ability to objectively, that is, without getting caught up, mixed up with, and carried away by the contents of the mind, but the ability to maintain your integrity, maintain your poise, maintain your objectivity, your stillness, your clarity, your cognizance in the midst of emotions coming up and desires and thoughts and turbulence and laxity and dullness, and all these waves of the mind, all these fluctuations of the mind, and not be caught up and carried away by them, which then you've lost your stance. You've lost your stance, right? So this practice that we're about to do really would be optimal. Less wear and tear, and more incisive, swift results of gaining certainty, clarity, if you've already achieved shamatha. I mean, that's just the way it is. And one can frankly spend a lot of useless, unpleasant time reflecting about, trying to figure out, ruminating, having uncertainty, struggling about stages along the path further than where one is, never come to any real clarity. Because you're not ready for that yet. And it's not just one person here has done it, it's easy to do. Because we want to figure everything out before we do it. We want to figure out everything all the way through. Madhyamaka, Mahamudra, Dzogchen. I haven't quite figured out Turkgel yet. What about that fourth vision in Turkgel? How is that different from this? We want to get it all figured out. And then what very easily happens after we figured it out is we treat it like a crossword puzzle. Now I've got figured out, I figured out Dzogchen, but now what about the 6, now that I've nailed that one, how about the 6 dharmas of Naropa? I haven't quite figured that one out. So please tell me exactly how is the illusory body different, and then we nail that one, and then we go into Kala Chakra. What about those 6 yogas on the stage of completion of Kala Chakra? I haven't quite figured that out, And by the time, we figure all those out, we'll be dead, suffering from malnutrition, because we actually haven't eaten anything. We've just figured everything out, and which means that we can be very good at explanations, and show all the cross references, and this relates to this, and then quoting this one, and be a real maestro, while in the meantime you're dying of malnutrition. So, as we turn this awareness inwards from a state of equipoise, we're asking, how do I exist? I want to put it in a simple English, so not get into conceptual trips or abstract trips, but how do I exist? How do I appear? How do I apprehend myself? Let's take an analogy here. Imagine you're a film critic, a good one, and you're watching a film, and familiar actors come on the screen, and I would suggest, having no experience being a film critic, having seen some movies, is that as an actor, a well-known actor, let's say like a Robert De Niro, obviously, extremely gifted actor, you see him coming on the screen, performing a certain role, and as a film critic, maybe you're one of those people, maybe you're on the committee for the Academy Awards, and here comes an obviously great actor, but is this a truly great performance? Or is it just one of the other performances he did? Or is this just one of those that just shines, that glows in the dark, that he's going to be a real candidate, for another Academy Award? Something like that, yeah? And so as you see Robert De Niro then on the screen performing a certain role, you'll see on the one hand, how does he appear? Well, he's appearing as this goofy, neurotic, mafia guy, and it's really a comedy. You seen that one? What was it called? Analyze This, yeah. Really, quite hilarious. I thought it was hilarious. Really hilarious. But he played that role. I mean, to my mind, I'm not a critic, but I thought it to perfection. Because he can play anything, obviously. And here he was, he's on the one hand, you kind of take him seriously as a mafioso bad guy, and on the other hand, he's hilarious, because he's so screwed up and neurotic. Especially, I'm so pretty. Hearing a mafioso Don sing that was just really quite priceless. In any case, I digress. You're watching the movie, and you're evaluating, how is he? How is he? Robert De Niro, the actor, how is he? Right? Because whether he gets a nomination or not, how is he? On the other hand, the role he's playing, what kind of a guy is this that he's playing? This neurotic mafioso, this Don, who's suffering all this guilt and so forth. How does he appear? Those are two utterly different questions. Robert De Niro is not a mafioso and so forth, and he's not that neurotic, I don't think. And so there's the way he is and the way he's appearing, because he's playing a role. But then there's your take on it. How are you apprehending this figure who is appearing on the screen? How are you apprehending that? What's your take? Okay. Those are three different things, right? Important not to conflate them. They are three different things. And as a film critic or evaluator of an actor's role, you'll be aware of all three. Yeah? So if you're asked after the film, please describe the character that Robert De Niro was playing in this film, well, you could do it in detail, right? Please tell me what was the quality of Robert De Niro's performance. You could tell that in detail. What was your evaluation of the character? Was it a good screenplay? Was it an interesting character who was playing? But also, what was your evaluation of how he performed that role? What was your take? It's a subjective, what's your take, right? So those are three quite distinct, yeah? Okay, that's pretty obvious there. But now let's say you meet somebody, now just ordinary life, and you meet somebody, maybe in a business context, and this could turn out to be a long-term business relationship. Three things still occur. As you get to know the person, you get to know how is this person? How is this person really? Because the person may be putting on a show, may be putting on a performance, may be trying to manipulate you in some way. There's the way the person appears, and then you might find a discrepancy or disparity. What's the word I'm looking for? Disparity, thank you. Disparity between the way the person appears and the way the person is. Maybe the person's really a con artist, or maybe very, very dishonest. But such a good performance, such a schmoozer, really knowing how to, get you to trust him and so forth. And so, but as you get to know, you say, well, this is the way he appears, but I've been watching carefully, and this is the way he is. And sometimes they're very congruent. When Paul Ekman was observing His Holiness Dalai Lama in the first Minor Life meeting that he attended in 2000, he said, I've never seen anybody in my life who's so transparent. Where there's just no difference. It's just completely transparent. As he appears, that's how he is. And here's a man who's studying faces professionally for decades, is a world expert on it. So that kind of thing, yeah? So you get to know a person, and you get to know how is the person, but also how does a person appear? How is this person presenting him or herself? Right? And then what's your take? What's your take on the person? How do you apprehend the person? Okay? So I think it's very important if we're going to really get benefit, because this is medicine after all. It's not just an intellectual exercise or a philosophical quest. This is medicine to cut the root of samsara. Right? This is intended, it's really deep medicine. And so then we can ask, all right, so we have the film critic, we have getting to know a person, these three modes of observation or inquiry hold valid. And then we can ask, well, can you observe yourself? Just in daily life, just from day to day, can you observe yourself? For example, when you look in the mirror, can you observe yourself? Of course you can. Yeah. But is that the only time you can observe yourself? Observe, I don't mean just visual, I mean can you be aware of yourself? Take note of. Really watch, observe. Not only in the mirror, but can you observe yourself when you're not looking in a mirror? I think the answer is quite clearly yeah. Are you aware how do you appear? How do you appear to yourself? Just like the other two cases, these are coming right into the nucleus. How do you appear to yourself? Okay. And then how do you exist? How do you appear to yourself? As you see yourself from situation to situation to situation, how do you appear? Right? You appear in a certain way to other people, and probably different ways to different people. How do you appear to yourself? Right? And then, how are you? How do you exist? As you observe yourself, how are you actually? How do you exist? And then what's your appraisal? What's your take? What's your evaluation of the kind of person you are? Do you like this person? Dislike? Find agreeable, pleasant, find virtuous, non-virtuous, interesting, boring, noble, crude? What's your take? Now, we can do this as we observe ourselves in different situations, right? And encountering different kind of people. We kind of get to know who we are, what kind of a person we are. How are you when you deal with really aggressive people or very condescending people, very selfish people? How are you? How are you when people praise you, or maybe they show a lot of admiration? How are you then? How are you when people ignore you? Etc., etc. How are you? How do you appear? And what's your take? How do you apprehend yourself? So we can see that, and we can then be more self-aware. But then can we also do the same? How are you? How do you appear? How do you apprehend yourself? Can we do this also when we're sitting quietly in meditation and really not doing much at all? In fact, I would suggest here the optimal platform is one you're familiar with by now. Settle your mind in its natural state. And from that stillness, that kind of objectivity, that doesn't have a whole lot of personality, right? From a perspective that doesn't have much personality at all, hardly even has any gender, is not really old or young, not really smart or not smart, just there, watch the show. Watch the show of the activities of your mind. And can you observe yourself in that context? My answer is yes. Can you observe how you're appearing as you're just settling the mind as a natural state, but free flow? This is where it turns out to be really important. Not editing, not shutting down, not antidoting, not remedying, not fixing, not suppressing, free flow, right? Just whatever comes up. And it could be memories and passions and desires and emotions and feelings and speculations and virtues and non-virtues and coarse and subtle and pleasant and unpleasant. Open that Pandora's box and let you pop out in your myriad manifestations. Because it's not just going to be the same, right? Any more than if you're married, you know your spouse doesn't always appear in the same way. The longer you know, you find more faces. And so similarly here, rest in the stillness of your awareness, and then watch as you observe yourself. As you're aware of yourself, taking note of yourself. How are you present? How do you appear? And how do you apprehend yourself? So that's the practice. Okay? Good. So, but now this becomes really, really obvious, doesn't it? The more you've really cultivated the ability of the shamatha practice, of settling the mind in its natural state, or taking the mind onto the path, the more effective, the more, less wear and tear, less stressful this practice will be. Because if you keep on if you're trying to do this, and then every 3 or 4 seconds you're carried away, caught up in cognitive fusion there, and cognitive fusion there, and after a while, not much fun, you know. And Dharma goes a lot better if you enjoy it. It's not much fun. If you're kind of basically, it's like trying to play a piano piece that's just way over your head, and you hear yourself play and you grimace, and you're wondering why am I trying to play this piece? I'm just stumbling all the way through it. Better chopsticks well done than list done poorly, right? That was a big spectrum, by the way. So, always comes back to shamatha, create your basis. That's your telescope, that's your stability, that's your clarity, and your ability to continue in the practice without seizing up, without getting tight, without getting exhausted and drained. So I front-loaded it a lot, so now I won't need to speak much at all. Please find a comfortable position. It's Vipashyana time. This is the kind of thing in an optimal setting. That is, if we were just all lifelong yogis living in a contemplative observatory, this is exactly the place where you would do it for some days, and then you would come in and you would be expected to report. You know, you meet with your teacher, whoever it may be, and the teacher would say, "It's not time for you to ask questions. It's time for me to ask questions." When you observe yourself, how to How do you exist? How do you appear? How do you apprehend? Speak. Like talking to a dog. Speak. Arf, arf, say something. And if you have nothing to say, then you may as well leave. Because we're here to make observations and report. And then through the reporting and then getting feedback, that's frankly a lot faster than just trying to do it on your own. As I know from my training in the Buddhist School of Dialectics, you can study, Glenn knows this, you can study texts on Sautrantika and Yogacara, you can study and think about it. But I can tell you, because I've done both, doing that, on the one hand, just studying and hearing teachings and thinking about them and so forth, on the one hand. On the other hand, taking a text, memorizing it verbatim, which we all did, and then getting instruction on it for a short time, and then spending 5 hours, for every hour of instruction, spending 5 hours a day out on the debating courtyard. Well, there's no comparison. Because that's where your understanding really becomes public. And you're going away at it, and taking different positions, sometimes taking position and defending it, and then next session, then you're the one standing, clapping your hands, and analyzing another person, deconstructing it, trying to demolish it if you can. And the next time you're going back and forth. There's no comparison. Some people have so much horsepower, they can do that on their own. Frankly, in my experience, not many people do. Because when you're spending 5 hours a day and you're facing somebody who's looking down on you and clapping his hands really loudly, you can't fall asleep. And you can't get very distracted. Because they're standing right in front of you and say, chill. You can't say, what? Oh, I had a distracting thought. I was suffering from laxity for a moment. Well, stop it! Something like that. So we don't have the time, but of course I will expect you to report in detail to Glenn. We're doing as well as we can, given limited time. We have 2.5 weeks. Let's get cracking.